That you're all with. All right, got the magic Zoom words that our recording is in progress. So let's kick this off. We have a rich program planned for you, and I'm delighted that you've all taken some time to be with us today. I'm Kathleen Scott. I serve as the Vice President for Leadership Development and Partnerships at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, also known as ASCU. It is my pleasure to be with you all and to welcome you to today's webinar. We know how busy you are. We're grateful that you've taken the time to be with us for this rich learning experience that we have planned for you. Today's conversation is sponsored by one of ASCU's valued thought partners, Gray Associates, and I'll introduce you to our speakers in just a moment. Our focus today will be learning how to use data, both from internal and external sources, to evaluate and optimize academic programs to increase enrollment and completion. One couple of quick housekeeping notes before we dive in. We have a total of 45 minutes planned together. Our session is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be shared with all registrants after today's session, and then we'll post the recording on ASCU's on-demand webinar page, so you can access this for more information or share with your colleagues any great insights that you captured from today's conversation. We will save some time at the end of the conversation for questions, but we also invite your questions and comments throughout. So if there's a burning question that you have, pop it in the Q&A. If you just want to make a comment or shout out, pop that in the chat, and we'll monitor both and bring your voice into the conversation as we dive right in. Today, we're joined by two esteemed guests. Mohammed Khayum, Provost of University of Southern Indiana, a proud ASCU member and home of the ASCU incoming board chair, Ron Rashan. Welcome, Provost Khayum. And Mohammed is joined by Zach Paz, who's the Chief Product Officer and Senior Partner from Gray Associates. Bios for both Mohammed and Zach can be found on the ASCU website, so I won't take the time now to go through their impressive careers and histories and what they're bringing to today's conversation. Before I pass it to Zach, I have to make a shout out that he's wearing a wedding ring on his left finger because in the last couple of weeks he got married. So our ASCU congratulations to you, Zach. Thank you to Gray Associates for being with us, and we're looking forward to this important conversation. I pass the conversation to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathleen. I appreciate it as always. Great. Well, welcome everyone. Excited to be here, talk to you a little bit about how you can leverage data and some new things that are coming out around evaluating and your programs and continuing to cultivate your program portfolio so that you're always focusing on making sure that you're providing the right programs for the market, you're mission focused, and ultimately sustainable as an institution. So what we'll be talking about today are what external market data is available, some pitfalls, some things you want to be careful of, how to leverage economic data and what that information can help you evaluate your program portfolio, specifically around costs and revenues and contribution margins within your program portfolio. Also talk about some new things that are coming out that could be helpful for you as you evaluate your program portfolio on an ongoing basis. So some new tools that could be helpful for you. And then finally, I'll hand it over to Mohammed to talk about how he's been leveraging data at University of Southern Indiana as kind of a case study, an example of how all of this can work together. So starting with markets, actually, before I jump into that, I want to give you kind of a high-level understanding of how we at Gray have thought about program evaluation and really putting together an entire program evaluation system. We developed this with institutions just like USI and many other institutions over time, really understanding what their needs are when they're evaluating their program portfolio, whether that's identifying new opportunities, evaluating the current, and always keeping mission at the center. So the way we think about this is in 4 different quadrants. First, mission of the institution and how do your programs support that mission. Academic standards, from enrollment to faculty mix to student outcomes, and how are you measuring that and where and are you meeting your standards. Margins, so that you can understand what programs are costing you money, what programs are making money ultimately because you inherently have to subsidize your mission with margin, right? So it's important to understand where that margin is coming from. And then the fourth piece is getting a perspective of what's going on externally. So what's going on from an employer perspective in terms of what skills they're looking for, what jobs they're posting for, what the employment outcomes are for graduates, so you can have a strong ROI for the student, all the way to who you're competing with and how your value propositions compare to your competitors' value propositions, because ultimately the student is looking at multiple options and they're going to choose one or the other. All of this information is important, but unless you wrap around the right people at your institution and a process to work through it, it's going to be very hard to leverage this information. I think Mohammed will give a very strong use case of how he's been able to include both people and process wrapped around all this information. So let's jump into markets and really get to understand what information is out there and available for you to evaluate your programs. Again, there's a lot of data that you have internally about your programs. What can you leverage externally to help you make better informed decisions? So again, very similar to how we think about program evaluation system in 4 quadrants, we have 4 sections of external market data. We have student demand, employment, competition, and degree fit. And I'll give you some discrete examples of all 4 of those in a minute. So many times we get asked, I need to identify new programs for my school or my university. Where do I even start? And so many of these data sources that are out there can help you kind of identify, prioritize, and rank new opportunities, right? So here's an example of using a system that brings together all of the relevant data from an external perspective on every program option out there. Using the iPad's coding system, there's over 1,400 programs. In many cases, an institution will have between 50 and 150, maybe even 200 for larger institutions. So if you can imagine, there's another 1,000 or so program codes that could potentially be an opportunity for a new program. So that's a lot of information to be gathering and to a lot of program options that it would be hard to say, oh, how do we know what's the best opportunity? When I work with institutions, many times the ideas come through the faculty, which is important. Absolutely, you want ideas coming from faculty because they're ultimately the subject matter experts that are going to be bringing the content and to the student and the program. So having a way to validate those and say, okay, here's your program. How does that compare to programs that we currently have from a student demand perspective, from an employment demand perspective, from a competitive perspective? So not just looking at this from a way to rank potential new programs, but also have information from ideas that come from faculty. Now, we're going to start digging into each of these and understand that all of these data sources that we're going to be looking at today all have their frailties. They also all have strengths. So that's one reason why we want to look at multiple data sources. And here's an example of the student demand section, the way that we look at it, and looking at really the entire funnel of a student life cycle and what each of these steps in that process tell you about the demand for your program. So one of the most comprehensive data sets is the completions data coming from the Department of Education, IPEDS data. And what it tells you is how many completions, how many graduates, or how many conferred degrees were there last year. Now that's great, but in many cases, if you're trying to think forward looking and really understand what students are looking for now, that's a little bit more of a dated view. If you're looking at graduate level programs, maybe it's 2 years from when they decided their program to when they completed. Undergrad could be 4 years. So it's a little bit longer, but very comprehensive look at student interest. We also look at enrollment data. So this is very current up to the most recent year. who enrolled in what program. So you can really understand more recent trends and what students are looking for. And then if you work all the way up to maybe what students are searching for, that's a very current trend in what students and potentially a more forecasting view of what students are interested in. So all three of these data sources will have their frailties, right? Depending on the timelines and comprehensiveness, but combining them all together can give you a pretty good picture of what's going on from a student demand perspective. Here's an example of a program that looks at, and we're looking at all three of the metrics. In this case, we understand that volume is very large for this program. I'll tell you what the program is in a few minutes. But as I was talking about the trends and understanding that each three of those data sources have different timelines, what can that tell you about this program? And in this case, the completions trends were 16% increase. So there were 16% more graduates in the most recent reported year from the prior year before that, or the year before that. Now, the more recent data tells us that the enrollment data only grew 1%. So now more recent information is saying, that did grow from a completions perspective, but is that slowing down because now enrollment actually only grew 1%? And then if we look really forward looking into the Google search data, Google search trends for this program is down 13%. Is that a warning sign potentially of maybe the demand for this program is slowing down? Now, just looking at those three metrics, would we say that this is something that we should be, a cause for concern? Most likely not, because there's a ton of volume, but you definitely want to be aware of maybe this isn't the program that you're going to put all your chips in and say, this is a growing area. Maybe it's slowing down a bit. And again, I'll tell you the program in a minute. So that's the student demand section. Again, important to have multiple views of what's going on, not only from a volume standpoint to confirm the size opportunity or not. It could be a smaller program that you perform really well in, and that's absolutely fine. But also understanding what are the trends in student demand as well. From the employment perspective, there's many different data sources around employment, starting with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the most comprehensive data on occupations and understanding how those are changing over time, as well as the total volume of employees in those occupations. We can also look at job postings data. Who's in the market today? Posting what jobs, what skills are they looking for, what certifications, obviously what industries are they in, and where are they posting these jobs? So again, very current information on what employers are looking for. And then the final, a third data source is the American Community Survey, which is very important, and I'll start to talk about why in the next few slides, but to really understand that the relationship from a program to an occupation can be very loose. There's some very strong programs like registered nursing that have a very strong relationship to the employment market. 80%, 86% of registered nurses go on to become a registered nurse. Well, many other programs, especially at the bachelor's level, which we're looking at an example of a bachelor's program here, don't have that strong relationship. And in this case, studying the American Community Survey, only 3% of these graduates from a bachelor's degree program go into jobs that the Department of Education and the government say are what they're being directly prepared for. So you want to have both that perspective of what's going on from the occupation side, but also what are the outcomes from the graduate side, because that relationship between the graduates and the occupations can be very loose depending on the type of program it is. So when you look, one of the biggest pitfalls of this crosswalk data is to look at what are the occupations that are the government saying are directly related to a program. So the program we were looking at was public health, and we were looking at it from a bachelor's perspective. And there are 4 occupations that the government aligns to this program: community health workers, health education specialists, health specialists, teachers, post-secondary, medical and health service managers. Right, so you could look at those 4 occupations, but from what we studied from the American Community Survey, you're only looking at 3% of what these graduates actually do. So what did they actually do? This is now looking at the American Community Survey. And what we found is that there's over 393 occupations that these bachelor's graduates from public health related programs go into. So that's a 389 occupation comparison difference from what the government crosswalk shows. So it's a big difference. Some of the largest programs, occupations that bachelor's in public health graduates go into, a category that's kind of a catch-all: managers, all other, registered nurses, medical and health service managers, lots of school teachers, ultimately eventually becoming physicians. And you can see some of the other options there. So if you're evaluating the potential outcomes of these graduates, just looking at the NCES crosswalk, you may be missing a large portion of the opportunity and the potential outcomes of these graduates. So one thing that we always say is, and start to work with institutions, not only rely on the other data sources that are available, but is there anything that you can do specifically around your graduates and to track their outcomes so that you can align it with what's going on, like an external benchmark like the ACS data as well. So pulling all this information together, we talked about student demand, which we know this program is a very large program. The growth trends are telling us that it could potentially be slowing down, but still very large. The employment opportunities for graduates from a direct prep are kind of just above average, as you can see here. The wage potential for direct prep, 36,000, 10th percentile, but really the mean wage is at 57,000. And if we look at this American Community Survey data, we can see no matter where they ended up in their occupation, those 390 plus occupations, the wage less than 30 is just under 40,000 on a national perspective. And then they're more mid-career to advanced career, we're looking at 80,000. So you can see the progression from these graduates, no matter what occupation they end up in. Some other important pieces of information here I didn't mention is the competitive intensity section. So if you're considering launching this program brand new for your institution at the bachelor's level, it'd be good to understand that there's 203 other programs nationally. And about 24 of those have an online program. And those the average program size for those programs is around 44 graduates, which is pretty large. I'd say that's in the 93rd percentile compared to all other programs. But the median is 16, so there's a lot of large institutions that are bringing up that average. So that's where you can look at the list of institutions completing this program, completing students in this program, and say, where do I fall on this? Am I closer to that median? Or would I fit a little bit higher or even potentially lower as a way to give a first indicator of potential opportunity? And we'll talk about another way kind of in the next section of how you can really evaluate new program size potential. And then another piece of information that can be helpful as we work with institutions more and more, we're starting to realize that they're doing more and more program level marketing. And so this can give you, looking at the Google search data for program keywords, we can start to understand what's an appropriate budget to put together to promote your program programmatically. In this case, $24 per cost per click is a little bit higher. So this program would cost more to promote relative to other programs. And then from the degree fit perspective is this appropriate program at the bachelor's level? Or is there another level that it can be, is more appropriate? And if we look at this, the national completions, 44% are at the bachelor's level, 48% are at the master's level. So really it's pretty close split between bachelor's and master's. So you might have the opportunity to offer this at both levels. Maybe you have a strong faculty resources around this type of program that you can leverage those resources and offer both levels, for example, because it's viable at both levels from a graduate perspective. Aligning that with the workforce, you can see bachelor's 33%, master's 25%. And this is a snapshot of everyone in the occupations related, directly related to the program again. So it's really only looking at that direct prep piece, but gives you an idea of that, yes, this is a viable program at many award levels. Okay. So that's the external market data. Again, very quick. One thing that we'll be going through if you're joining us in Baltimore is in-depth study of leveraging this data in interactive way. So the next piece is evaluating your internal data and leveraging economic data to help you evaluate the opportunities within your current program portfolio, but as well as understanding that margins is important to support your mission. And the way you can look at this is understanding that from a student perspective, if you think about one student or on a per student credit hour basis, you look at gross tuition and fees, how much gross revenue is each individual student bringing into your institution, how much discount is being given back to them, whether that's institutional scholarships, institutional grants that are actually reducing the amount of revenue that they're bringing in to get to a net revenue per student credit hour or per student in this calculation. Then the question is, how much does it cost to teach those students? Right. That then gets you to a program contribution. And we say program contribution because we're really only looking at direct instructional costs and revenues. There's a whole lot of other costs that go along with running the institution, like the president's salary, for example, that won't be a part of this calculation because no matter what you do at the program level, there won't be any changes to the president's salary, most likely. So again, why is this important? Because the higher education institution inherently has two goals. They have their mission goals, but they also have their financial sustainability goals. And you need both of those front and center to be able to be a sustainable institution. And knowing that you're a mission-centric institution, you need to be able to support potentially those programs that aren't as large, and maybe they cost you more money. We'll look at a couple of examples in a minute. But understanding that high margin programs will actually help you support your mission and support those other programs, mission critical programs and activities as well. One thing that we always hear as budgets get constrained is institutions start to look at program size as a rule of thumb for either sunsetting programs or teaching out programs. But what we find when we look at this data is that small programs can be contribution positive. In many cases, they are, right? So just using a rule of thumb of just size, you could be actually removing gross revenue contribution positive programs. So here's an example of an institution's program portfolio that looks at size based on student credit hours taught, and then contribution. And as you zoom in, you can start to see, yeah, there are some programs that are contribution negative, right? The courses that make up the students that are enrolled in the program are costing you more money in the aggregate than those students are bringing in. Could be many different reasons for that. One obvious one is class size. What's your fill rate? Another one is who's teaching that classroom, who's teaching in that class. Another one could be supplies. So those are three main reasons of potentially higher cost than margin. An example, one that we always see is music. Music department has very high costs, there's very low class sizes, small class sizes. And so many institutions have to make that decision, or already making that decision without knowing it, that they're subsidizing their music program with other programs. And that's, obviously important and absolutely fine. Where we see the most opportunity working with institutions is at the course level. understanding that you have a lot more opportunity and a lot more flexibility and a lot more a quicker transition to making decisions at the course level. You're making course level decisions each semester or quarter. So having this data at this level, at the course level, can help you plan quicker and make quicker decisions about potentially high cost programs or courses that are costing you money. In addition to being able to identify at the course level, you can start to look at benchmark information. The first and easiest thing to do is just benchmark your programs as an institution, which programs are making money and which programs are losing money. But in many cases, that's an apples to oranges comparison, right? We know that music is going to cost more than business. So it doesn't really make sense to compare those two just because they have different cost requirements. Another way to do this is look externally and get external benchmarks. And so, working with different institutions, for example, Gray, we have a benchmark consortium where you can compare your program costs per student credit hour to a benchmark program costs. So you can understand, yes, our music program will cost us money relative to all of our other programs, but how does it compare to other institutions? Right? How does it compare to the median? Is it above, are there programs that are much less? In this case, the 25th percentile. Are there programs that are even more? The 75th percentile. So having that external perspective of program costs can be a really valuable way to look at like for like, or apples to apples. All right, so that's a view into how you can leverage your internal data to really understand where you're making decisions from programs that are contributing high margin, that are subsidizing potentially programs that are mission centric, and you can have programs that are mission critical on both sides of the coin, right? But understanding what decisions you're making using the data to help you identify that can be really helpful. You can also use a lot of this information, same information from a student perspective, to understand what are the academic outcomes. So you want to increase your academic outcomes for your students. Being able to calculate this on many different dimensions can help you identify where you might want to focus your resources. So here's an example of looking at DFW rates from an overall perspective across the institution. And in this case, we can see actually DFW rates are going down. So maybe you have initiatives that you're putting in and you want to be able to measure how strong are those initiatives. Are they working? So you want to be able to measure this over time so that you can understand how well your investment in certain initiatives is panning out. Looking at it by demographics. How are you serving the different demographics of your institution? And understanding that maybe different demographic groups need different resources. How are those DFW rates different by department? Are there different areas that you need to add additional resources so that you have an equal or you can make decisions around resources within each department? You can then identify, are there specific courses causing issues? Are there course levels? And then even programs, aggregating those course levels all the way up to the program. Again, all of this information can help you with specific initiatives you have around academic outcomes and performance for your students. Just a reminder, that was a quick view into kind of some of the data you can leverage and why you would leverage it, but there's a whole lot more information, and again, we'll be digging into that more in Baltimore, but there's a lot more resources we can share with you if you have any other questions. Now, thinking in the future, AI is always a hot topic, and one thing I want to talk through is how you can leverage AI and machine learning to help you run your program evaluation system. There's three areas that we think of. There is the three areas that I'm going to be talking about today. This is not an exhaustive list at all, but one is reporting. So how do you identify and how do you streamline being able to create and evaluate, use reports to help you make better informed decisions? There's alerting systems. So maybe you can see that the cost per credit hour for one of your departments grew X% year to year or declined X% year over year. You want to be able to be potentially alerted of that so you can keep track of things like that. And then the third one I'll mention is predict. How can you use predictions to help you manage your programs, identify new opportunities, calculate margins, and potentially help you with decisions around scheduling and staffing requirements. So the first one is reports. One of the big questions that we always get: what program should I start? As I mentioned in the beginning. So what is the critical data and information that you need when a faculty member comes to you with a program idea, right? So bringing all of that into a report that you can then understand all the external market data so that you can be better informed about what your next step is about that potential opportunity. Many of the questions that we get around the data and that we provide is, this is great, but I don't have the analysts to be able to work with this, right? Or I don't have the time to learn something to be able to do that. So there's a lot more options out there, like natural language questions or plain English questions, to be able to get at some of the analysis. So here's an example of being able to ask the system a question like, show me program contribution per student credit hour. And with natural language processing, it can then produce a chart for you. And then there's also different ways that you can work with it. So being able to manipulate, or not manipulate, but to work with the data that you have is becoming easier and easier. It's not just working in Excel anymore and having multiple tabs and having to have a resource potentially to work on those reports for you. Being able to work with this data is becoming easier and easier. So how about alerting? You now have potentially 50 plus metrics of your internal data. You might have 50 plus metrics of external data. How do we identify different ways to work with that information without having to scan through it all the time, right? So creating alert systems that say, tell me if student demand grew X% this month versus last year, and tell me which programs those are. And so you can create alerting systems that do that, so you can be and get informed of current information about changes. Tell me about my current program portfolio and student cost per credit hour and how that compares to benchmarking. And tell me when it gets too high, if it's X% over a benchmark or X below a benchmark. Again, alerting to help you identify potential issues or things you should be happy about. And then from the predict perspective, how can you use machine learning to help you in your decision-making process? We've been asked many times when I'm looking at new program opportunities, how do I budget for this program? I've used the example of how I've heard institutions do this in the past, which is faculty identified how much it's going to cost to develop and sustain. They then divide that by the growth, the tuition that they're going to charge. They then get a number of enrollment that they need to break even. So that's their budget for students. That'd be great if that works all the time. I'm sure it does sometimes, but in many cases that's kind of working backwards to get to your enrollment number. So what information and what techniques are available outside to help you predict program sizes? Some things that we've leveraged: school attributes like size, type, focus, and location, and then program attributes. Are these programs that you're thinking about, do you have this type of program at your school. For example, if you're thinking about launching engineering, do you already have an engineering school? What's the award level? What's the modality? And using that information, you can actually come up with a machine learning prediction for a potential new program. Using that information, you can then help build out what's the appropriate ramp-up model for a new program. So you can have a more accurate view of new program plans. And then finally, a big hot topic is understanding what the employment market looks like. So how does your curriculum align to the jobs, specifically the skills employers are looking for? How does that relate to the industries and the potential industry partnerships that you want to go after? And ultimately leading to what are the most in-demand jobs and how does that relate to your curriculum? And are there things that you need to do about your curriculum to better align with the employment market? Right. So you can use tools to scan your syllabi and your program descriptions and course level descriptions to evaluate how well aligned you are with the employment market. Okay. Again, this was meant to give you kind of a snapshot and a teaser of things that are out there and available. And as you work through any of these or you have any other questions, I'd be happy to chat in more detail about this. But now I do want to hand it over to Mohammed to give an example of how he's been leveraging data at University of Southern Indiana.
Thank you, Zach. So I'm just use this slide to run through essentially what a bunch of the other slides we'll talk about. So we started our engagement with Gray, our partnership, in June 2021. We really started working actively from July 2021. So coming up to the end of this month will be 2 years of work. And in that process, we've been able to have 3 on-ground sessions with Gray personnel, and in between, a whole range of online sessions. So we were motivated to work with Gray because of some things that were happening internally. And essentially from 2011 to the present time, our overall enrollment has been declining on the campus. So roughly between that time and now, over 3,000 students headcount drop. In 2021, 2025, so early 20, we started our third strategic plan, which was for the period 21 to 25. And 2 words were interwoven in that plan from the vision statement right down to goals and other elements. And those 2 words are learning and innovation. And when we look back at our learning over the decade or so that our enrollment has declined, we had some serious questions about whether we learned much, because we seem to be doing a lot, but not changing the trajectory of what was happening. And we had the word innovation, and we couldn't answer a simple question, which was, what's the innovation mix of our academic portfolio? Which programs were really innovative in terms of being radical or game-changing, and which ones were more incremental and evolutionary in focus? So we started this journey in 21. In 2 years, we've been able to get to a point where those themes of collaboration, change management, and innovation are key in the process of working on a partnership with Gray Associates, at least in my view. We took a long time, about 8 months, to get our data together. And that's too long, but we had some internal challenges in getting 3 offices to work in a way that would clean up a lot of the things that needed cleaning up, and that's our HR department, our business affairs department, and our institutional research area. And so my suggestion would be for any group that wants to work on this, whether on your own or with Gray, those 3 offices need to really work together in a collaborative way to streamline the process. Secondly, that every time you start to talk about something like looking at program, and particularly the economics, you get a question about, are you going to cut programs? And I think managing that change is very critical. And the way we've done it is to really start from the ground up with the faculty senate, the chairs, the deans, and then really up to the leadership. So our most recent session was really with the leadership, but we started way back at the level of the faculty senate and chairs. And we really engaged the faculty senate on this question about how would you judge whether our programs are really innovative or not, and then had them engage in the process. So if you can turn to the slides now, I can just go through those fairly quickly. This gives you a sense of our university. The red dots are online students, where they come from, and the heavy blue concentration, we're in the southern part of Indiana. And you can see most of our on-ground students are coming from the neighborhood states. You can turn to the next one. So the numbers, fall 2010 was our last high point, and then from fall 11 onwards, you can see that decline. We have about 130 areas of study, nearly 100 undergrad programs, about 15 graduate programs, and then a bunch of certificates and concentrations in between. Most of our alums stay within the state, and we have a profile that looks much, I think, like many institutions. Our modality of delivery has changed back from COVID to where it used to be before. When we had COVID, of course, the on-campus portion had shrunk to almost zero for a semester or two, and online took up most of that. What's interesting is that we have a very small proportion of hybrid compared to the online and the on-ground. If we could turn to the next one. Next slide, please. This is just to put us in context. Let's go back one. And so given what we're hearing with regard to the way in which many people are describing the need for higher ed to respond with very short programs, micro-credentials, I put it less than 2-year institutions in here, but the general pattern is that between 2010 and 2021, we've had a decline across the board in the control type institutions, whether it's private, nonprofit, private for profit. The biggest decline has occurred in private for profit, and the 4-year public institutions have actually shown a slight increase over time. And that, I think, augurs well for some institutions, but creates some challenges for some others that fit into the other categories. We can go to the next. So where do we stand? We're like in that group of schools that are within that 7,000 to 7,500 students. And you can see from the distribution that that's where the majority of institutions are in that number or below. And then you have a range of them that have very high enrollments, but increasingly less and less so. Next slide. So when we looked at our program, the way we do program evaluation before grades, we have a template and it has those elements up there. And what we found is that we didn't have much by way of content or even requirements around market data and financial data. And those are the two pieces that the modules on economics of the curriculum and the market evaluation or the program evaluation system gives to us. So we went out and found that we were not that different. Many institutions also lack those two pieces of information by and large. And as a result of that, we decided that our work with Gray would help to supplement what we were trying to do. Internally, we tried to do this on our own for many years. We just didn't have the internal infrastructure to do it quickly. And as I said, the data took a bit longer than it needed to. As I mentioned, we engaged the Senate. We had our counselor chairs be involved in our workshops. And the most recent session in April this year was with our leadership and our governance groups. So we have a staff council, faculty senate, and admin senate, and the reps from those groups were involved in the economics of the curriculum. So there are no surprises as we continue. Our main thing, as we go to the next slide, is to try to get to a point where we can take our 130 programs and put them in any one of these 4 quadrants. And that really is in line with our strategic plan, which has some areas around both student success, but also financial viability. And so we have to look at the market and the opportunities that exist. We also have to look at our internal assets and what makes sense in terms of what we possess. And our goal would be to use Gray's data so we can get to a point where the 130 programs fit somewhere in this mix. And then that starts the conversation about what do we do, given what we know. And so the next slide. More or less, the framework we have is that eventually we want to be able to say, of these 130 programs, how many of them are really in that realm of differentiation with regard to other programs like them across the nation? Which ones are really radical or revolutionary and new thinking? And of course, most of them, if you can guess, are evolutionary or really incremental changes that we've made over time. So our lessons with Gray has been that patience, the need to take we have all the data internally, but we needed a mechanism to catalyze movement. And that took more time than we really wanted, but we're where we are. And then the third is the process of engaging people incrementally so that we get to a point where the goal is really to ensure that we have a learning out of this process about how we become a better organization, as opposed to deal with fear, which a lot of people have about this is going to lead to some dramatic reductions, which we have not done. And as a result, I think we've maintained some trust and credibility in the process. I think that gets me to the time.
Thank you.
That was a lot of information. Thank you to both of you. I think the final statement that you made, Mohammed, is really profound, and that the process to engage the campus in any kind of change initiative to really get that stakeholder buy-in and participation as you drive this kind of change forward. I feel like we all want to know the outcome of where it's going to land, USI, in your enrollment picture, and what your program portfolio will look like in the future. Any quick synopsis of where you stand today, or your crystal ball as you look to the future?
Well, I think where we are is understanding that much of what we're doing is really catch up as an institution because of our history. We're just trying to replicate what many other institutions have. And so that's forcing us to start thinking about how do we leap as opposed to continue on that linear path. And then I think the economics of the curriculum is really allowing us to understand where Zach started out. There are some areas that are going to have to support others. And not because we don't have contributions in a range that we want for some programs, it means we do anything negative to them. We really need to see how you sort of innovate around them and look for adjacencies where we connect them with some growth programs. And that's the direction that we're moving.
Thank you, Mohammed. And Zach, any final words as we wind down and close us out?
No, you said it right. We went through a lot of information per usual with us. So I thank you for sticking around and appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. So thank you very much to both Zach and Mohammed. A great conversation and great resources. And yes, we will get this deck out to everyone, and the recording of today's conversation will be posted. Before we wrap up, I want to remind you that the academic affairs summer meeting, Zach mentioned see you in Baltimore a couple of times, just wanted to underscore that our annual conference for academic and student affairs leaders is coming to the Baltimore waterfront this July 19th through 21st. We'll explore how faculty, staff, and students are navigating a whole bunch of challenging issues in 2023, from educational gag orders to ChatGPT to political extremism to alternative facts. You name it. The conditions for teaching and learning have rarely been this challenging. And so we're looking forward to a rich learning and networking opportunity. And we hope we see many of you on the call with us in person. Gray will be hosting one of the pre-con workshops on the 19th. And so there's an opportunity for a much deeper dive into this subject area. So look forward to seeing you there. I think the session they're leading is Academic Programs Informed by Labor Market Data, the Truth, the Misinformation, and the Alternative Facts. So we look forward to seeing many of you in Baltimore. We'll also Gray will be hosting a symposium in our ASCU's DC offices in October, where we'll have a day and a half to dive into this information. So registration for that will be coming out soon. Thanks again to Gray and to Zach. Thank you everyone for joining. We wish you all a wonderful summer and look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.
Thank you.